According to the widely accepted Kurgan hypothesis, the Indo-European language and culture spread in several stages from the Proto-Indo-European Eurasian homeland in the Pontic steppes, into Western Europe, Central Asia, India and Sri Lanka. This process started with the introduction of cattle at the Eurasian steppes around 5200 BCE, which led to a new kind of culture. Between 4500 and 2000 BCE, this horizon, which includes several distinctive cultures, spread out over the Pontic steppes, and outside into Europe and Asia. Origins. Heimat. The Proto-Indo-European Heimat hypotheses are tentative identifications of the Heimat, or primary homeland, of the hypothetical Proto-Indo-European language. Such identifications attempt to be consistent with the glottochronology of the language tree and with the archaeology of those places and times. Identifications are made on the basis of how well, if at all, the projected migration routes and times of migration fit the distribution of Indo-European languages, and how closely the sociological model of the original society reconstructed from Proto-Indo-European lexical items fits the archaeological profile. Beginning in the 1970s, the mainstream consensus among Indo-Europeanists favors the Kurgan hypothesis, placing the Indo-European homeland in the Pontic steppe of the Chalcolithic period. The Pontic steppe is a large area of grasslands in far eastern Europe, located north of the Black Sea, Caucasus Mountains and Caspian Sea, and including parts of eastern Ukraine, southern Russia and northwest Kazakhstan. This is the time and place of the earliest domestication of the horse, which according to this hypothesis was the work of early Indo-Europeans, allowing them to expand outwards and assimilate to conquer many other cultures. The primary competitor is the Anatolian hypothesis advanced by Colin Renfrew. It states that the Indo-European languages began to spread peacefully into Europe from Asia Minor from around 7000 BCE with the Neolithic advance of farming. All hypotheses assume a significant period between the time of the Proto-Indo-European language and the earliest attested texts, at culture.Between, c. 19th century BCE. Steppe theory. Kurgan hypothesis. The Kurgan hypothesis is one of the proposals about early Indo-European origins, which postulates that the people of an archaeological Kurgan culture in the Pontic steppe were the most likely speakers of the Proto-Indo-European language. The term is derived from Kurgan, a Turkic loanword in Russian for a tumulus, a burial mound. The Kurgan model is the most widely accepted scenario of Indo-European origins. The Kurgan hypothesis was first formulated in the 1950s by Maria Gimbutas, who defined the Kurgan culture as composed of 4 successive periods, with the earliest including the Samara and Sariglazovo cultures of the Dnieper-Volga region in the Copper Age. The bearers of these cultures were nomadic pastoralists who, according to the model, by the early 3rd millennium BC expanded throughout the Pontic Caspian steppe and into Eastern Europe. Revised steppe theory. David Anthony has incorporated recent developments in his revised steppe theory, which also supports the steppe origin of the Indo-European languages. Anthony emphasizes the Yamnaya culture as the origin of the Indo-European dispersal. Recent research by Hark et al. Confirms the migration of Yamnaya people into Western Europe, forming the corded ware culture. Proto-Indo-Europeans. The Proto-Indo-Europeans were the speakers of the Proto-Indo-European language, a reconstructed prehistoric language of Eurasia. Knowledge of them comes chiefly from the linguistic reconstruction, along with material evidence from archaeology and archaeogenetics. Asiatics. According to some archaeologists, Bai speakers cannot be assumed to have been a single identifiable people or tribe, but were a group of loosely related populations ancestral to the later, still partially prehistoric, Bronze Age Indo-Europeans. This view was held especially by those archaeologists who posit an original homeland of vast extent and immense time depth. However, this view is not shared by linguists, as proto-languages generally occupy small geographical areas over a very limited time span, and are generally spoken by close-knit communities such as a single small tribe. The Proto-Indo-Europeans were likely to have lived during the late Neolithic, or roughly the 4th millennium BCE. Mainstream scholarship places them in the forest steppe zone immediately to the north of the western end of the Pontic-Caspian steppe in eastern Europe. Some archaeologists would extend the time depth of Pi to the Middle Neolithic or even the early Neolithic, and suggest alternative Proto-Indo-European Urheimmats. By the late 3rd millennium BC, offshoots of the Proto-Indo-Europeans had reached Anatolia, the Aegean, Western Europe, and southern Siberia. Root populations, the Proto-Indo-Europeans, c.q. the Yemnaya people, seem to have been a mix from Eastern European hunter-gatherers and Caucasus hunter-gatherers, c.q. Arash-Chalcolithic people with a Caucasian hunter-gatherer component. According to Jones et al., Caucasus hunter-gatherers' genomes significantly contributed to the Yemnaya steppe herders who migrated into Europe till 3000 BC, supporting a formative Caucasus influence on this important early Bronze Age culture. CHG left their imprint on modern populations from the Caucasus and also Central and South Asia, possibly marking the arrival of Indo-Aryan languages. According to Haak et al., the Yemnaya steppe herders of this time were descended not only from the preceding Eastern European hunter-gatherers, but from a population of Near Eastern ancestry. Quote, according to Lanka.This et al., a population related to the people of the Arash-Chalcolithic contributed till 43% of the ancestry of early Bronze Age populations of the steppe. Quote, according to Lanka.This et al., these Iranian Chalcolithic people were a mixture of the Neolithic people of Western Iran, the Levant, and Caucasus hunter-gatherers. Pre-Proto-Indo-European. The Indo-Hittite hypothesis postulates a common predecessor for both the Anatolian languages and the other Indo-European languages, called Indo-Hittite or Indo-Anatolian. Although it's obvious that Pi had predecessors, the Indo-Hittite hypothesis is not widely accepted, and there is little to suggest that it is possible to reconstruct a Proto-Indo-Hittite stage that differs substantially from what is already reconstructed for Pi. According to Kurgan, Indo-Uralic is the pre-Pi, postulating that Indo-European and Uralic share a common ancestor. According to Kurgan, Indo-European is a branch of Indo-Uralic which was radically transformed under the influence of a North Caucasian substratum when its speakers moved from the area north of the Caspian Sea to the area north of the Black Sea. Antony notes that the validity of such deep relationships cannot be reliably demonstrated due to the time depth involved, and also notes that the similarities may be explained by borrowings from Pi into Proto-Uralic. Yet Antony also notes that the North Caucasian communities were southern participants in the steppe world. Language. Indo-European languages. The Indo-European languages are a family of several hundred related languages and dialects. There are about 439 languages and dialects, according to the 2009 Ethnologue estimate, about half belonging to the Indo-Aryan sub-branch. It includes most major current languages of Europe, the Iranian plateau, and the northern half of the Indian subcontinent. continent, and was also predominant in ancient Anatolia, with written attestations appearing since the Bronze Age in the form of the Anatolian languages and Mycenaean and Greek. The Indo-European family is significant to the field of historical linguistics as possessing the second longest recorded history, after the Afro-Asiatic family. Indo-European languages are spoken by almost 3 billion native speakers, the largest number by far for any recognized language family. Of the 20 languages with the largest numbers of native speakers according to SIL Ethnologue, 12 are Indo-European: Spanish, English, Hindi, Portuguese, Bengali, Russian, German, Punjabi, Marathi, French, Urdu, and Italian, accounting for over 1.7 billion native speakers. Several disputed proposals link Indo-European to other major language families. Proto-Indo-European language. The Proto-Indo-European language is the linguistic reconstruction of a common ancestor of the Indo-European languages, spoken by the Proto-Indo-Europeans. Pi was the first proposed proto-language to be widely accepted by linguists. Far more work has gone into reconstructing it than any other proto-language, and it is by far the most well understood of all proto-languages of its age. During the 19th century, the vast majority of linguistic work was devoted to reconstruction of Proto-Indo-European or its daughter proto-languages such as Proto-Germanic, and most of the current techniques of historical linguistics were developed as a result. Scholars estimate that Pi may have been spoken as a single language around 3500 BC, though estimates by different authorities can vary by more than a millennium. The most popular hypothesis for the origin and spread of the language is the Kurgan hypothesis, which postulates an origin in the Pontic-Caspian steppe of Eastern Europe. The existence of Pi was first postulated in the 18th century by Sir William Jones, who observed the similarities between Sanskrit, Ancient Greek, and Latin. By the early 20th century, well-defined descriptions of Pi had been developed that are still accepted today. The largest developments of the 20th century have been the discovery of Anatolian and Tocharian languages and the acceptance of the laryngeal theory. The Anatolian languages have also spurred a major re-evaluation of theories concerning the development of various shared Indo-European language features and the extent to which these features were present in Pi itself. Pi is thought to have had a complex system of morphology that included inflections and ablaut. Nouns used a sophisticated system of declension and verbs used a similarly sophisticated system of conjugation. Relationships to other language families, including the Uralic languages, have been proposed but remain controversial. There is no written evidence of Proto-Indo-European, so all knowledge of the language is derived by reconstruction from later languages using linguistic techniques such as the comparative method and the method of internal reconstruction. Genesis of Indo-European languages. Using a mathematical analysis borrowed from evolutionary biology, Don Ringe and Tandy Warnow proposed the following evolutionary tree of Indo-European branches: pre-Anatolian, pre-Tocharian, pre-Italic and pre-Celtic, pre-Armenian and pre-Greek, pre-Germanic and pre-Balto-Slavic, Proto-Germanic c. 500 BCE, Proto-Indo-Iranian. David Anthony, following the methodology of Ringe and Warnow, proposes the following sequence: pre-Anatolian, pre-Tocharian, pre-Germanic, pre-Italic and pre-Celtic, pre-Armenian, pre-Balto-Slavic, Pre-Greek, Proto-Indo-Iranian, split between Iranian and Old Indic 1800 BCE. Ringe and Warnau's methodology may be outdated, and not accurately reflect the development of the IE languages. Elite recruitment and language shift. According to Maria Gimbutas, the process of Indo-Europeanization of Europe was essentially a cultural, not a physical transformation. It is understood as Yamna migration to Europe as a military victors in terms of successfully imposing a new administrative system, language and religion upon the indigenous groups. The social organization greatly facilitated the Yamna people's effectiveness in war. The patrilineal and patriarchal structure. The old Europeans had neither a warrior class nor horses. They lived in theocratic monarchies presided over by a queen priestess. This old European social structure contrasted with Yamna Indo-European arrivals. Indo-European languages probably spread through language shifts. Small groups can change a larger cultural area, and elite male dominance by small groups may have led to a language shift in northern India. According to Guas Krunen, Indo-Europeans encountered existing populations that spoke dissimilar, unrelated languages when they migrated to Europe from Yamna steppes. Relatively little is known about the pre-Indo-European linguistic landscape of Europe, except for Basque, as the Indo-Europeanization of Europe caused a largely unrecorded massive linguistic extinction event, most likely through language shift. Gus Krunen's study reveals that pre-Indo-European speech contains a clear Neolithic signature emanating from the Aegean language family and thus, patterns with the prehistoric migration of Europe's first farming populations. According to Edgar Polomé, 30% of non-Indo-European substratum found in modern German derives from non-Indo-European speakers of Funnelbeke culture indigenous to southern Scandinavia. When Yamna Indo-European speakers came into contact with the indigenous peoples during the 3rd millennium BC, they came to dominate the local populations, yet parts of the indigenous lexicon persisted in the formation of Proto-Germanic, thus giving German the status of being an Indo-Europeanized language. According to Maria Gimbutas, recorded where culture's migration to Scandinavia synthesized with the Funnelbeke culture, giving birth to the Proto-Germanic language. David Anthony, in his revised step hypothesis, notes that the spread of the Indo-European languages probably did not happen through chain-type folk migrations, but by the introduction of these languages by ritual and political elites which were emulated by large groups of people, a process which he calls elite recruitment. According to Parpola, local elites joined small but powerful groups of Indo-European-speaking migrants. These migrants had an attractive social system and good weapons, and luxury goods which marked their status and power. Joining these groups was attractive for local leaders, since it strengthened the position, and gave them additional advantages. These new members were further incorporated by matrimonial alliances. According to Joseph Salmons, language shift is facilitated by dislocation of language communities in which the elite is taken over. According to Salmons, this change is facilitated by systematic changes in community structure, in which a local community becomes incorporated in a larger social structure. Sequence of diffusion and migrations. A Heimat step theory. Most scholars agree that the area of the Kurgan culture, as proposed by Maria Gimbutas, is the area of the Heimat of the Indo-Europeans. For this Heimat, Indo-European languages spread throughout the Eurasian steppes between c. 4500 and 2500 BCE. Kurgan hypothesis. Maria Gimbutas formulated her Kurgan hypothesis in the 1950s, grouping together a number of related cultures at the Pontic steppes. Her grouping is nowadays considered to have been too broad. According to Antony, it is better to speak of the Yamna culture or Eurasian, which included several related cultures, as the defining Proto-Indo-European culture at the Pontic steppe. According to the Kurgan hypothesis, the diffusion of the Proto-Indo-Europeans from the Heimat took place in the following sequence: 4500–4000 Early Pi, Saradni Stog, Nipodonits and Samara cultures, domestication of the horse. 4000–3500 The Pit-Grave culture, the prototypical Kurgan builders, emerges in the steppe, and the make-up culture in the northern Caucasus. Indo-Hittite models postulate the separation of Proto-Anatolian before this time. 3500–3000 Middle Pi. The Pit-Grave culture is at its peak, representing the classical reconstructed Proto-Indo-European society with stone idols, predominantly practicing animal husbandry in permanent settlements protected by hill fits, subsisting on agriculture, and fishing along rivers. Contact of the Pit-Grave culture with late Neolithic Europe cultures results in the Kurganized globular amphora and Baden cultures. The make-up culture shows the earliest evidence of the beginning Bronze Age, and bronze weapons and artifacts are introduced to Pit-Grave territory. Probable early Satamization. 3000–500 Late Pi. The Pit-Grave culture extends over the entire Pontic steppe. The Corded-Ware culture extends from the Rhine to the Volga, corresponding to the latest phase of Indo-European unity. The vast, Kurganized area disintegrating into various independent languages and cultures, still in loose contact, enabling the spread of technology and early loans between the groups, except for the Anatolian and Tocharian branches, which are already isolated from these processes. The centum-satum break is probably complete, but the phonetic trends of satamization remained active. According to Gimbutas, the Corded-Ware formed part of a homogeneous Indo-European culture, which existed until 2500 BCE. This proposition was rejected by Mallory, but is confirmed by Haque al. According to the Kurgan hypothesis, the Western Indo-European languages split off after 2500 BCE. According to Antony, the early migrations started earlier, with migrations into the Danube Valley at 4000 BCE, and migrations southward and eastward in the 3rd millennium BCE. Revised steppe theory. According to Antony, between 3100–2800 and 2600 BCE, a real folk migration of Proto-Indo-European speakers from the Yamna culture took place into the Danube Valley. These migrations probably split off pre-Italic, pre-Celtic and pre-Germanic from Proto-Indo-European. Anatolia Hittite belongs to the oldest written Indo-European languages, the Anatolian branch. Although the Hittites are placed in the 2nd millennium BCE, the Anatolian branch seems to predate Proto-Indo-European, and may have developed from an older pre-Proto-Indo-European ancestor. If it separated from Proto-Indo-European, it is likely to have done so between 4500–350 BCE. Europe, Danube Valley and the collapse of Old Europe. According to Antony, steppe herders, archaic Proto-Indo-European speakers, spread into the lower Danube Valley about 4200–4000 BCE, either causing or taking advantage of the collapse of Old Europe. Asia, Makop culture, Afanasevo culture, Tocharians. According to Mallory and Adams, migrations southward founded the Makop culture, and eastward the Afanasevo culture, which developed into the Tocharians. Yet, according to Maria Ivanova, the Makop origins were on the Iranian plateau, while Kurgans from the beginning of the 4th millennium BC at Soyip Bulak in Azerbaijan, which belonged to the Layla-Tepe culture, show parallels with the Makop Kurgans. According to Musi Ibli, the Layla-Tepe culture tribes migrated to the north in the mid-4th millennium BC, and played an important part in the rise of the Makop culture of the North Caucasus, Europe, Danube Valley and Corded-ware culture. According to Antony, between 3100–2800 and 2600 BCE, a real folk migration of Proto-Indo-European speakers from the Yamna culture took place toward the west into the Danube Valley. These migrations probably split off pre-Italic, pre-Celtic and pre-Germanic from Proto-Indo-European. According to Parpola, this migration is related to the appearance of Indo-European speakers from Europe into Anatolia, and the appearance of Hittite. According to Antony, this was followed by a movement north, which split away Baltic Slavic at c. 2800 BCE. Pre-Armenian split off at the same time. The Corded-ware culture in Middle Europe has been associated with some of the Indo-European family of languages. According to Harke al., a massive migration took place from the Eurasian steppes to Central Europe. This migration is closely associated with the Corded-ware culture, Sintashta, Andronovo and the Indo-Iranians. The Indo-Iranian language and culture emerged in the Sintashta culture, where the chariot was invented. The Indo-Iranian language and culture was further developed in the Andronovo culture, and influenced by the Bactria-Marjana archaeological complex. The Indo-Aryans split off around 1800 to 1600 BCE from the Iranians, whereafter Indo-Aryan groups moved to the Levant, northern India, and China. Thereafter the Iranians migrated into Iran. Archaic Proto-Indo-European, the Anatolian branch. The Anatolians were a group of distinct Indo-European peoples who spoke the Anatolian languages and shared a common culture. The Anatolian languages were a branch of the larger Indo-European language family. Although the Hittites are placed in the 2nd millennium BCE, the Anatolian branch seems to predate Proto-Indo-European, and may have developed from an older pre-Proto-Indo-European ancestor. If it separated from Proto-Indo-European, it likely did so between 4500–3500 BCE. The archaeological discovery of the archives of the Hittites and the belonging of the Hittite language to a separate Anatolian branch of the Indo-European languages caused a sensation among historians, forcing a re-evaluation of Near Eastern history and Indo-European linguistics. In accordance with the Kurgan hypothesis, J.P. Mallory notes in Encyclopedia of Indo-European Culture that it is likely that the Anatolians reached the Near East from the north, either via the Balkans of the Caucasus in the 3rd millennium BC. Together with the Tocharians, the Anatolians constituted the first known wave of Indo-European emigrants out of the Eurasian steppe. Although they had wagons, they probably emigrated before Indo-Europeans had learned to use chariots for war. It is likely that their arrival was one of gradual settlement and not as an invading army. The Anatolians' earliest linguistic and historical attestation are as names mentioned in Assyrian mercantile texts from 19th century BC Kanesh. The Hittites, who established an extensive empire in the Middle East in the 2nd millennium BC, are by far the best-known members of the Anatolian group. The history of the Hittite civilization is known mostly from cuneiform texts found in the area of the kingdom. and from diplomatic and commercial correspondence found in various archives in Egypt and the Middle East. Despite the use of Hatti for the core territory, the Hittites should be distinguished from the Hattians, an earlier people who inhabited the same region. The Hittite military made successful use of chariots. Although belonging to the Bronze Age, they were the forerunners of the Iron Age, developing the manufacture of iron artifacts from as early as the 14th century BC, when letters to foreign rulers reveal the latter's demand for iron goods. The Hittite Empire reached its height during the mid-14th century BC under Suppilulium I, when it encompassed an area that included most of Asia Minor as well as parts of the northern Levant and Upper Mesopotamia. After 1180 BC, amid the Bronze Age collapse in the Levant associated with the sudden arrival of the Sea Peoples, the kingdom disintegrated into several independent Neo-Hittite city-states, some of which survived until as late as the 8th century BC. The lands of the Anatolian peoples were successively invaded by a number of peoples and empires at high frequency: the Phrygians, Bithynians, the Medes, the Persians, the Greeks, the Galatian Celts, Romans and the Oghuz Turks. Many of these invaders settled in Anatolia, in some cases causing the extinction of the Anatolian languages. By the Middle Ages, all the Anatolian languages were extinct, although there may be lingering influences on the modern inhabitants of Anatolia, most notably Armenians. Europe, Danube Valley. According to Antony, steppe herders, archaic Proto-Indo-European speakers, spread into the lower Danube Valley about 4200–4000 BCE, either causing or taking advantage of the collapse of Old Europe.